Hi everyone, welcome back to another series of videos that I'm going to be doing on a very interesting third move alternative to handling the Ruy Lopez or the Spanish game on move 3, and that is to introduce you to the very provocative move F5, which is known as the Schliemann Defense. So just to go through the variation very quickly, so the Spanish game arises after move e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop b5. It's the most popular opening on the database, and it remains a staple in any grandmaster's repertoire. It's popular all levels of play, club level all the way up to super grandmaster level, and it's just a great opening. White is simply looking to threaten to undermine his defense of this pawn on e5, and well, there's many different variations that black can go into, and there's some incredibly interesting long variations that both white and black can play. However, what I want to present to you is instead of the mainline positions, go and have a look at the third most popular move on the database, and that is the move F5. What is the purpose of this move? A very strange, very provocative move known as the Schliemann Defense. So what is the purpose of this move? Well, white is aiming to exchange a wing pawn for a central pawn. In the process, he's going to give himself a semi-open f-file to attack along after a kingside castle. The positions as a result do end up being incredibly double-edged. So it's, I guess, a very nice move if you're really into very aggressive, very attacking style of chess. Now, for my, I guess the advantages of going into this sort of line is that white can't really go for a lot of his calmer Ruy Lopez lines. So let's say if you go into a mainline position, there are still interesting gambits like the Marshall Gambit. White does in fact have a decent anti-Marshall Gambit line and actually can avoid that incredibly complicated line. And I guess one of the big advantages of this is that it's unavoidable. If white plays his standard Spanish game, he's going to get shocked when he sees a move like f5 suddenly play. Furthermore, every line is incredibly exciting. There's lots and lots of complications that black can throw at white to create really murky, complicated, unusual positions that you wouldn't see in a normal Ruy Lopez. The gambit is actually relatively sound, and also not only that, grandmasters and even super grandmasters have played it at the highest level. In fact, on the database you will find a game by Magnus Carlsen who has played this line as, I guess, as a shock weapon at the highest level. As it's also the third most popular option, it's unlikely that white may have faced this line before as often as, let's say, the mainline positions. For myself personally, at club level, I've played opponents who, although would say they're experts on the Spanish game and have played the Spanish game for maybe 16 years over the board, I've had some players who've actually never faced this over the board at all, and in fact kind of treat this move as just a really unsound move and just not very good at all. I guess the only thing I would say in terms of the downside of this particular gambit is the lines are very sharp. They're very double-edged positions, so you're going to need to be comfortable in playing in complicated positions. Okay, so before I go into the 5 main moves that white can play, and these will be topics in future videos, I want to show you an illustrative game that at least shows you some of the key ideas in the Schliemann Defense, and that is delivering a fast kingside attack using the semi-open file that I've shown here on the f-file, and showing some of the double-edged complications that can occur in a lot of your games. So I'm just going to switch boards now and go back to the start here. So this was a game that I played in the London Chess Classic last year. I was playing on the black side, and the game started like this with f5. So I played the very provocative f5 move. Here my opponent played knight to c3, which is one of the main lines against the Schliemann defense. Now, pretty much in every line that I'm going to show you, black will needs to, as I guess as a thematic plan, needs to take on e5. So I took on e5, the knight captured on e5, and what this move allows me to do is now take over the center with the move d5. So now his knight is under attack. My opponent decided to capture with his bishop on c6. I captured back on b6, and here my opponent decided to sacrifice a knight after knight to e5, d captures an e4. He then played queen to h5. So it looks as though white is getting a very good attack on my king. I then defended it with g6. My opponent sacrificed his knight. I captured back, and then I lost the rook on h8. It looks as though things aren't going well for black. He's got some horrible pawn weaknesses for himself to have to contend with. Not only that, he's also down materially a pawn. But in actual fact, would you believe it, this position is in fact theoretically good for black. In fact, there are a couple games on the database that I have that shows that black is in fact winning. And I'll show you now why that black does so well in this particular variation. So after the move bishop to e6, I'm now defending my knight and also defending a piece. And at some future point, would you believe it, I'll be looking at ideas of castling longside. We'll see how that goes in a sec. His queen came back to c3. He needs to get it out of the offside area over here. And with this move, it now comes with, I guess, a small tempo gain in the fact that it now attacks c6. I defend it with my queen to d5. I'm now also looking at ideas of castling long. My opponent played b3, and I played bishop to c5. Here my opponent didn't play perhaps the best move in this position. I think bishop to b2 would have been a satisfactory response in developing his pieces, and maybe even looking to potentially castle on the queen side. But here he decided to play queen to g3, which looks at trying to again create some complications and attack these pawns here. But of course, by doing this, white has still neglected his development. Bear in mind he's made 3 different queen moves and has not developed, not castled, he's not developed any of his other pieces. I castle long, and suddenly it looks as though black is the one on the front foot here. All his pieces are developed, and well, except for the knight, but he's also aiming at potentially delivering a very fast kingside attack that white will need to deal with. After opponent decided to castle short, I played my rook to f8, which is now hitting this potentially weak f square. Rook to b1, knight to f6, he played d3, knight to g4. I'm now attacking this f2 square, so he now plays bishop to e3, defending it, and instead of doing some captures along here, I decided to move my bishop back to d6, which is now hitting the queen, but also attacking the h2 square. My opponent tried to go for some complications with d takes and e4, but after queen takes, he then moved his queen to h4, after which point I had a very dominant position. I now captured on h2, his king came back to h1, and my bishop came back to e5. I've now got a simple plan of moving my rook over to h8, which will then attack his, will skewer his, pin his queen to his king. He played his rook to b to e1, and this actually has an idea of, if this bishop ever came to defend, of then uncovering an attack on my queen. I still went to h8, now hitting the queen. He blocks it with his bishop, so now he's trying to create his own little threat over here. But I'd now play, I could have still captured here and it would have still been a fine position, but in this position I found a lovely way of finishing off this game. I decided to capture on f2 with my knight. A really nice move, as essentially white is unable to defend against the many different threats that I've got here. In the game he captured on f2 with his queen, after which I captured his bishop with my rook, and my opponent resigned after this. The point being, after the king comes here, I can now play bishop to h2 check, after which the king comes here. I can then play my bishop back to then hit his queen again. After the king comes back, I can capture this safely because it becomes with check, and in fact, in order to not lose any more material, he needs to capture with his king. Not ideal. I've definitely got a winning position here. Going back, if he decides to capture with anything else, well, furthermore, if I have a look at, let's say, king coming here, this of course uncovered this attack on the queen, so I could just take the queen off. Also, if rook captures as well, the queen can capture here and it's checkmate in 2 moves. So a really nice game, just to show you some of the potential venom. The game only lasted 23 moves, so at least shows some of the devastating attacks that black can come up with if white is not adequately prepared for the variation. So going back then to the start, let's have a look at some of the main lines that can be played here. So at this particular point there are 5 different moves that white has played in this position. The first one is known as the accepted variation, and this begins after the move e takes on f5. In actual fact, this move is a slight inaccuracy, and in actual fact black can equalize relatively comfortably in this position, but it still requires some knowledge as to what to do and some of the complications that can occur. The key move here is moving the pawn forward, hitting the knight, and then at some point later in the game pushing this other pawn forward, taking back this pawn, and then being materially equal. There's some very nice positions here from black. Another move that you could face is the move d3. And this tends to be a move that you will play against if, let's say, your opponent isn't very familiar with this particular variation. I myself, when I've played this online, I tend to see this variation quite a bit. In actual fact, this move is relatively harmless, and black can get some very good play in this position. Another move that you could face, and a little bit of a dangerous variation in the sense that it's probably the only move that white can do that will try and steer the game into quieter territory, is the exchange variation. So after this and d takes on c6, you in fact actually have a transposition to the exchange variation of the Spanish game. The only difference being here that the pawn has come to f5. It normally will come to maybe a move like f6, or you defend this pawn with d6. Still a fine variation for black. There's little less complications than there are in some of the other variations. Then we move into 2 of the more complicated variations. The move d4 is an incredibly aggressive way of handling this particular gambit. In this variation, absolute carnage can occur, and some of the variations are so complicated. I've had a look at them on this particular study, but they are just totally crazy, totally mad. But it does offer some very interesting positions that you'll probably never ever see before in your entire life on chess. And finally, the mainline position, and the move that's seen the most on the Grandmaster database, is the move knight to c3. I guess the big advantage of this move is that white is actually developing a piece. But again, the variation, as you saw there, very complicated. It can lead to some very, very sharp play for both sides, and certainly a variation that, although is the main line, white needs to know what he's doing, otherwise he can get himself into some very early trouble. So the last thing I want to mention is that there's a study that's available on Lichess on all these variations. I'll link this in the description below and also link it at the start of this video. Do take a look at it. The person who made this has put quite a lot of hard work and effort into providing these variations, and they're all very, very interesting, all very, very complicated. I'll be using this for most of my videos to kind of go through some of the main positions. But in any case, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure you check out the future parts and the future installments of this particular opening repertoire guide. Take care. Bye.